Chapter 23. Walking away from the square, Beth was as light as air. She could hardly believe what was happening. As if on cue, a train whistle rang out. At the sound, Teague shouted to the others, "Let's go!" They ran across the road, ducked into the bushes, and emerged near the tracks. Finn pulled Beth between himself and Teague. "Okay, so most of the time, we'll be catching on the fly," he said. "That means you're jumping on board while the train's still moving," explained Teague. Beth nodded. As weird as it was being in between the two of them, she was happy that Finn was being nice. Whatever made him change his mind, she would not question it. Finn continued. "We let several cars pass. You don't want to hop on too close to the engine, because odds are that close, an engineer could spot you. You don't want to get caught, especially if they have to stop the train because you jumped on." The train rounded the corner. Finn raised his arm, gesturing toward the cars. "That's the lead engine. Most times, the train will have 2 or more engines pulling the cars. The more engines, the better for us, because that means it's a heavy, long train." Teague interjected. "A long train is going to move slower, which means it'll be easier to get on and off. It's also less likely anyone will ever know we were there." Finn spoke rapidly. Teague filled in the blanks. Beth held back a giggle. For the first time since meeting him, she was looking to Teague for clarification, funny accent and all. He was easier to follow than Finn. The first engine passed by, then the second and third. Still pointing at the cars, Finn explained. "Now, every type of car has its pros and cons. Some are easier to ride than others. We prefer boxcars or grainers," said Teague. "Boxcars for obvious reasons. Grainers because they have what we call a porch at the front and back of each car that you can sit on and enjoy the ride. Gondolas are good too, if they're empty. They're filthy though," said Finn. "Fine soot and dust flies out of the cars and blows all over the place. That's why you need a buff or a bandana and some goggles. They also have a small, open-frame porch. They're tricky to ride on," added Teague. "Running on these cars exposed in the open is risky." Beth listened and watched as the cars rolled past. They pointed out each area to grab hold of and explained how to get settled quickly, making room for the others. So much information. She wondered how she would remember everything. "The easiest place to catch on is at a rail yard. We prefer side-outs," said Teague. "That's a spot where 2 trains will pass one another. One train will pull off to the side to allow the other to pass. We also like catching on in places where there's a bend in the tracks, or at the edge of town. The trains don't stop, but they have to slow down. That gives you time to hop on. It's better to catch on where there are fewer folks who can see you doing it. Catching on is the easy part," said Finn, smirking. "Getting off is a little trickier." "How's that?" asked Beth. She hadn't even considered hopping off. "Well, for one, if you ain't getting off at a rail yard, the train won't stop to let you off, so you have to jump while it's moving," he replied. He leaned closer. "It's not as bad as it sounds. You toss your pack off the train and wait for a clear spot and jump. Be sure to bend your knees and roll with it. You'll be fine." Teague placed his hand on her shoulder. "We can practice the jumping off part easily enough. Don't stress about it." Watching the rear engines pass, Beth's mind was whirling with all the information they just dumped on her. "Any questions?" asked Teague. "No, yeah? Lots, actually. I can't think of any," she replied. He smiled. "Well, speak up when they come to mind." He stood up, hit Finn on the shoulder with the back of his hand, and said, "Come on." Back on the street, River walked up alongside her and asked, "So you're seriously gonna come with us?" "Yes," answered Beth. "That is, if y'all are serious about wanting me to come along." River giggled and said playfully, "Aw, she's adorable. I want to keep her." She stopped walking, causing everyone else to pause in their tracks. "All those in favor of Beth coming along with us, say aye," she said. "Aye" was the response from nearly everyone. It was official. Beth was now one of them. River gave her a hug. Beth's heart soared. "So when are we leaving?" she asked. "Good question," replied River. "Hey, Finn, Teague, when are we leaving?" Teague spun around and, walking backwards, said, "Tomorrow?" as he shrugged and glanced at Finn, who nodded in response. Finn pulled his phone from his pocket. "I gotta find out when the next train heading to Austin is passing through. I'll do that now." He tapped away at his phone. "What is he doing?" asked Beth. "He's posting a message," replied River. "See, there's a schedule of all the trains, what they're hauling, where they're going, and when. Let's just say this info isn't public knowledge for obvious reasons." She grinned. "In some places, riders will pass info along face to face. We have a friend, Porter, who fills us in. Beth stopped walking and stared at River. Porter? She asked. Yeah, replied River. No one knows much about him, or how he knows the things he does. A while back, we asked him what we should call him, and he told us to call him Porter. I don't think that's his real name. However, whoever he is, wherever he is, he has access to all the train times, destinations, and what they're carrying. He also gives us a heads up when a stakeout is happening, so we know to avoid the area and not get busted. So, he helps you out? She asked River. Think he used to be a writer? Maybe, replied River. He does have a lot of knowledge about camps and squats. Camps? Asked Beth. That's a spot where lots of writers will gather, said River. They're always moving, never in the same place, to avoid being raided. Wow, I had no idea, said Beth. It's like there's a whole other world that just exists outside of the one I've been living in. Oh, Beth, there's so much more for you to learn, said River. Just wait, you're gonna have the adventure of a lifetime. As the sun set, it was time to head back to Beth's house to collect their gear and find a place to sleep for the night. By the time they arrived at the cozy brick house, it was dark. Beth's mom had parked her red sedan in the driveway, and the lights were on in the kitchen. Through the windows, she could see her mom moving around, dancing to music that Beth could not hear. Beth's mom was a kind woman. Rarely did she lose her temper. She always told Beth that she preferred to put her energy into being positive, making others happy. This was something Alicia was very good at. Crouched outside, Beth watched her mom move about the kitchen. A swell of childhood memories flooded her mind. The nights they danced together, singing and laughing to some old music from her mom's youth. Learning to make cookies, her mom patiently watching as Beth struggled to measure just enough flour for the dough. Alicia never scolded her when she got it wrong. She simply put the flour back and encouraged Beth to do it again. Winter afternoons sitting at the table, sharing a cup of cocoa. Her mom always made sure she had plenty of whipped cream and marshmallows on hand. Beth liked to fill her mug with both. Holiday meals, birthday cakes. Sadness bubbled up around the edges of her memories. She was scared that if she were to stand face to face with her mom, at that moment, she would cry. And possibly change her mind. Beth didn't want that to happen. She wanted to stay with her friends. Quietly, she waited as the others snuck into the backyard, gathered their packs from behind the shed, then stealthily walked away from the house. With each step, Beth's mood lightened. The urge to cry subsided. No more tug of guilt over leaving. No more childhood memories. Joking with one another and playing around, they walked through the neighborhood and across the tracks. This neighborhood differed from Beth's. The houses were much smaller, older, and not nearly as well maintained. With Beth as their guide, they walked until they came to a small home with tan siding, white trim, and a little front porch. All the windows were boarded up. Perfect. On the back porch, Zach pried the board off one window and, using his elbow, broke the glass. Reaching in, he unlocked the latch. From outside, Beth watched as the beam of his flashlight slowly disappeared around the corner. There was a click at the back door, then it swung open. "Welcome to our evening accommodations," said Zach, with a flourish. While the others made themselves comfortable, he and Finn went back outside and replaced the board to block the window. Cash and River pulled small, solar-powered lanterns from their packs and turned them on. The lamps filled the room with cool light. Cash rolled a joint, and once again, the flask of moonshine made an appearance. River handed Beth the flask. "Are you excited about leaving with us tomorrow?" Beth nodded, and looked at the bottle in her hand. This stuff again, she thought. "Honestly, I'm a little scared I'm going to mess up getting on the train," she replied. "Try not to overthink it," said River. "It's not as hard as they make it sound." Beth took a swig, and winced as she swallowed. The liquid burned the back of her throat. Outside, a train whistle blew. "Come on," said Finn, as he jumped to his feet. "What?" she asked. "No better way of getting over your fear than a trial run." Beth looked around at everyone, and realized they too were standing up. Next thing she knew, she was running out the back door, around the house, and down the street toward the tracks. The whistle called out. The train was getting closer. They picked up their pace, arriving at the edge of the tracks at the same moment the train roared past. The deafening rumble of the wheels made it impossible to hear anything that was being said. A metallic scent wafted in the breeze, created by the cars as they rolled by. All right, Beth. See that grainer? Finn pointed to a grain car. Beth struggled to read his lips. She could hardly hear. The sound of blood pumping through her head was louder than the train. She nodded. Her mouth was so dry she couldn't speak. Her heart raced inside her chest. That's the one, he said to her. As soon as it comes by, we're gonna run alongside of it and hop on. Got it? Once again, she nodded. Oh God, oh God, oh God, she thought. The car came closer. As it passed, they ran alongside. She was doing it. She was running and holding her own. Best of all, she was keeping pace with the others. The air was heavy with the smell of grease mixed with metal. It reminded her of the garage her uncle owned. Zach and Cash reached out and hoisted themselves up on one car, while River pulled herself up on the other. Teague hopped up next to River and leaned out, holding his hand to Beth. Heart pounding, she grabbed hold, and he pulled her off her feet. With her feet free, she took hold of the cold metal handle and pulled herself up, Teague's arm around her waist the whole time, helping her. She lifted her legs and swung them around, landing on the metal floor. The train jerked and swayed. She looked over to see Finn appear beside her. I did it! I did it! I did it! She thought. Her heart raced. Her whole body trembled. That's the adrenaline, said Finn, leaning close. It'll calm down in a minute. Just relax. Beth breathed in deeply. She couldn't believe she actually just did that. It wasn't so hard. Sure, it was scary at first, but it wasn't difficult. Filled with pride, she stuck her arm out from between the cars and let it glide along the air current. The train whistle blew one more time, and everyone stood up. Looking up at them, Beth asked, What are you doing? Finn smirked and said, This is our stop. What? Asked Beth. Panic welled up inside her once again. This is where we hop off, he said deliberately. I told ya, it's a practice run. The blood pounded in her head again. Her stomach was in knots. She struggled to catch her breath. This must be what it feels like to hyperventilate. The train lurched as it slowed to pass through the station. Rolling past the platform, Beth watched as graffiti scrolled by. Without warning, Cash hopped off, followed by Zach. Beth leaned over to see where they landed. Finn's voice rang out beside her. Just remember to bend your knees. He stood on the rail and launched himself to the ground. Beth watched as he rolled and came to a stop. It was her turn now. Teague nodded in encouragement. She took a deep breath, stepped on the rail, and glanced back at River and Teague. They stood still and nodded. She turned, faced outward, and leaped forward. She was flying untethered, like a bird. Her body was light as air. Her hair flowed in the breeze. A sudden jolt knocked her back to reality as her feet hit the ground. The impact of the shock rang up through her body. Legs buckling beneath her, she reached out, arms flailing, finding no purchase. Clawing at the air, unable to control herself, Beth tumbled on the gravel. She came to a stop on her bottom. Legs splayed before her. Her ears were ringing. Her head was swimming. It took a moment for her to realize that the muffled sound all around her was her friends, laughing. They were all standing around her. River kneeled down. Oh, Beth, that was the most ungraceful landing I have ever seen anyone make. Are you okay? She asked, fighting back giggles. Beth nodded, a little stunned. The ringing subsided. She wondered whether she broke something, besides her pride. They sat with her on the ground for a while as she regained her composure. Their teasing didn't offend Beth. She had been with them enough over the past couple days to know this was how they treated one another all the time. In fact, the teasing meant they already considered her one of them. This made it more tolerable. So, Beth, said Teague, you made your first hop on and off. How'd it feel? Beth rubbed her head. I think I need to work on my landings a little more. This caused another round of laughter from everyone. Ready to head back? He asked. Beth nodded, stood up, and brushed herself off. Her legs trembled. She wondered if she could make it back. Zach bent down in front of her. Hop on, he said. Thankful for the help, Beth climbed on his back, wrapping her legs around his waist and arms around his neck. He carried her all the way to the little tan house. They went over some tips for Beth to make hopping on and off a little less hazardous. For her, the fact that she didn't break anything this first time around made her feel much less nervous about it. It was near midnight when they turned their lanterns off and curled up to sleep for the night. In the darkness, River whispered to Beth, I'm glad you're coming with us. Me too. River sighed sleepily. I'm happy. I finally have a sister to travel with again. She rolled over on her side and closed her eyes to sleep.